As the global population grows, the challenge to end hunger only deepens. The UN World Food Program wants to wipe out global hunger by 2030, but can it be done? This week on Full Frame, we look at some of the innovative and perhaps a little unconventional ideas for eradicating hunger around the world once and for all. I'm Mei Lee in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. In 2012, 5 MBA students began developing an idea to address food insecurity in the world's urban slums. But it might seem a little unconventional to you. It's insect farming. But guess what? Not only did their idea win the world's most prestigious social enterprise competition, they beat out 10,000 other competitors and were presented the $1 million Holt Prize by former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Now, since winning the award, 2 of those students, Mohammed Ashur and Gabe Mott, have launched Aspire Food Group. It's a social enterprise focused on farming edible insects. It has operations in Mexico, Ghana, and the U.S. Take a look.
This type of farming can be done anywhere in Ghana. And especially the rural folks, they need this farming to supplement their income and to have protein in their diets.
It is an alternative way of giving people continuous livelihood and also raising their standard of living because they are making money.
Now, compared to livestock, insects require far less resources to convert the same amount of protein. Less farmland, less water, and emit far fewer greenhouse gases. Joining us now to share their vision of providing economically challenged and malnourished populations with high-protein, sustainable food solutions are Mohammed Ashur and Gabe Mott. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Thanks, May. So fascinating what you guys are up to. Mohammed, it's not every day you hear about insect farming, right? So why did you guys even decide to do this? Where did this idea even come from?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, so we were all in the MBA program at McGill University, and in maybe the first 2 months of the program, a friend reached out to me on LinkedIn saying, Mohammed, I know you're into these kind of things. Check this thing out called the Holt Prize. And I went on the website and saw that this was an interesting call to action that Bill Clinton, in conjunction with the Holt International Business School, put out to teams from around the world. Right. And every year there's a different challenge. And that year, 2013, the challenge is food insecurity in urban slums. How do you come up with a business that is for profit, which at its very core
and that's
solves...
important.
It's important, and that's to avoid the sort of one life cycle of charity, to create that perpetual sustainability. And that was very attractive from both a business perspective and also for most of our backgrounds.
But here's where I'm curious. So why insect farming? Because again, you know, in certain parts of the world, it's not a big deal, right? Consuming insects. But to you here, you're living in the States and you're going to school, insect farming. Wow. Gabe, I mean, you know, did that seem foreign to you at the time when you were tackling this?
Yes. Actually, I'll be fully honest. Mohammed actually, I mean, not only did he form the team and originally hear about the Holt Prize, we spent, I guess, 3 months, 2-3 months trying to sort out the different options and different solutions. We came up with a lot of good ideas, but we were low on spectacular ideas. And we knew the caliber of the competition that was going to be there. We knew it just had to be an extraordinary idea. And then Mohammed, I think you were talking to a friend of yours who was a physician. And he had a patient recently who had complained about stomach issues. And when he was doing his examination, she told him that she'd eaten insects. So the doctor assumed that it was the insects that had caused the illness. And the patient's like, obviously not. I've been eating them my entire life.
Oh, wow.
And so Mohammed's friend mentioned this to Mohammed. Mohammed brought it back to the team. And after a little consideration, we recognized that this was an idea that we could really run with. Yeah.
Wow.
Right, and to add to that, I mean, we know that 80% of the world's countries have a history of eating insects.
Yeah.
That's the vast majority of the world. So, in fact, while it's certainly not conventional that insects are consumed in the United States or in Canada or some parts of Europe, that's actually the exception and not the rule.
Right.
And of course, every country has a different history and a culture behind specific insects. So if you go to Mexico, for example, in the southern state of Oaxaca, people have a very strong and sort of cherished interest in eating grasshoppers, but that doesn't translate to every other insect. So people might say, look, I love eating grasshoppers, but silkworms, that's strange.
Yeah, that's
and in a different country,
right,
it's
exactly,
different.
exactly. But let's talk about the fact that insects, like you said, 80% of the world, actually consumes them, and the protein, the nutritional value of insects is pretty extraordinary. I said briefly in that intro that it's equivalent to other conventional animal proteins. So tell me a little bit about the nutritional benefits of insects.
Absolutely. So we obviously, because we all grew up in a part of the world where insect consumption isn't a prevalent thing,
right.
We wanted to understand what's the appeal here. Why do people enjoy eating insects? And the taste was up there, but then we noticed that the nutrition was extraordinary. If you look at 100 grams of cricket protein, for example, and you compare it to 100 grams of beef, both dry weight, crickets have almost 70% protein by weight, which is extraordinary when you compare it to many other conventional forms. And we're talking about in an almost unprocessed form. And not only is the protein content high, which is impressive, the iron content is impressive as well, and much higher than you would find in other conventional forms of livestock.
Like 6 times that of beef.
Yep.
6 times?
6 times, which actually, there are a lot of different situations where you can see different insects being really therapeutic foods, right? They can actually be used to address, we suspect at least, that they can be used to address medical issues.
Really?
So, for example, in southern Mexico, there are major issues with anemia in the rural populations. They eat some grasshoppers, but grasshoppers are obviously incredibly expensive, right? I mean...
Oh, are they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, if anywhere you go, anywhere we've been in the world, wherever you find insects in a market, they cost more than beef or chicken. So insects they are, without exception, a premium food everywhere.
And the question is, why is that?
Yeah, well, exactly. Why?
If they're so resource efficient, et cetera, it makes very little sense. Well, the reason is because insects are seasonal. So they're only available for a few months out of the year, and when they are available, you have to hand harvest them.
I see.
So managing a cow is significantly easier than catching 1,000 grasshoppers
Didn't
on a
think
field.
about it that way, because you think, I mean, we'll get into this, because obviously that's why you want insect farms, because you can grow them around year-round.
Absolutely.
Right? So I know that you're getting into that, or you've already started that concept, right, of insect farming. Tell me a little bit about where you're doing it and how you're doing it.
Yep.
David?
Sure. Yeah. So we have an insect farm in Ghana, in West Africa, and in Austin, Texas, because when you think Austin insect farming, you think Austin, Texas, right?
Yes, definitely.
Well, Austin has this motto, keep Austin weird, so we're trying to fit right in.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and so how is that going? And what are the challenges in actually farming insects?
I mean, there are a lot of challenges, but it's an exciting process. So if you think about conventional livestock farming, it's been done for hundreds to thousands of years, depending on how you want to count it. And on an institutional level, people have been doing industrialized livestock farming for quite a while.
Sure.
And so they've iterated, they've developed a lot of techniques, and they've become very, very efficient. Now, nobody's put the time and effort in to do this with insects yet. And as we start to do this, we recognize that, if you bring commercial processes to insect farming, you can improve the scale and you can get yields that are far superior.
And obviously bring the cost down, too.
Of course.
Right? Right.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the environmental benefits of consuming insects and growing insects, because it doesn't have the greenhouse gas emissions, it doesn't use as much water, everything that I talked about, again, in the intro. So how can that make an impact as well, if the world starts consuming more insects?
Absolutely, and actually that's precisely why we ended up setting up a facility in Austin, Texas. Remember, we started off focusing on emerging markets, developing countries where issues like iron deficiency, anemia, protein, energy, malnutrition are prevalent. But then you realize that California has a drought. You realize that Austin and the state of Texas is also in a perpetual, very difficult water shortage problem.
Yep.
And that, I'm not going to say is entirely, but certainly largely due to heavy water consumption in a lot of the livestock industry applications.
And the feed.
And the feed, absolutely.
Yep.
And so from our perspective, this is an objectively superior source of food, not just from its nutritional footprint and what can it do for the human body. We know all sorts of research now about red meat and how you should moderate your consumption of it because of other various sort of health consequences from over-consuming red meat. But there's the environmental component. Now you're looking at the footprint of your food.
Yeah.
How much water resources has it consumed? How much energy? How much land? And what are the emissions looking like?
Right.
And that's where insect farming becomes extremely attractive.
Well, I was just going to say, you brought some samples and you mentioned the powder. Tell me about what that is and the advantages of using that kind of powder. It's a cricket-based powder? Okay.
Yeah, it's not even cricket-based. It's just cricket.
It's
period.
just fully cricket.
Just cricket. Just
Yeah.
cricket.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you just roast them up, grind them, and you get this high protein, high nutrient, high iron powder that you can use as a supplement in your cooking, in your foods, and just put it into anything you want to cook with it. You want to put it into something sweet, you can. If you want to do a high protein, high iron pasta, you can do that too.
And you don't have the actual cricket like staring at you while you're eating it.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think the other component here as well is education. I think it's important for us to recognize that with any novel food entering into a market, there has to be some patience in terms of there being a synergy between market readiness and consumer readiness.
Yeah.
And for us, we take a lesson from the chapter of sushi or other kinds of foods that, in the past, not the very distant past, were unconceivable
That's true.
mainstream sources of protein or food. And today, of course, are so conventional that nobody
Right.
thinks twice about their origin or how they even penetrated the mainstream. And so from our perspective, there's both working in tandem with the consumer, understanding what is it that consumers really care about for cricket protein. At this point, for example, we've done tons of consumer surveys throughout North America,
Okay.
and in particular Canada and the United States. And we're finding that a lot of people are interested in the function of the protein. There's a ton of functional eaters out there, people who they look at food really as fuel.
As fuel, yeah.
And it depends, and if they can get a higher performance out of that food, it doesn't matter what it is, they're going to eat it. Then you have people who are very focused on, taste, and then you start working with chefs to create culinary, inventions and different ways that you can use this as an ingredient in appetizing, dishes.
Right.
And then there's people who really care about the social impact. And what's particularly interesting, and Gabe can probably comment about this even more because he's a vegetarian, is we're even finding certain communities, even within the vegetarian community, people who actually find this to be an interesting protein alternative.
Okay.
Because it doesn't, while it may be considered an animal protein, it doesn't carry the ethical and sort of ecological concerns that a lot of vegetarians who have those kinds of concerns.
Conventional animals.
Absolutely.
Proteins, yeah.
So understanding the consumer and what the consumer desires and understanding that this is a product that is new to the market, that there is some education required, is also crucial in order to really make sure that it's not a gimmick, but that it is something that is seen as a food source. And with a planet that is growing as rapidly as ours is,
Right.
that is urbanizing rapidly, that is seeing a shortage of arable land, and that is going to have nearly 9 billion people, we're not going to be able to continue to feed the whole world using beef and using chicken. We're going to need new alternatives. So in some sense, people have to gracefully embrace this as just a part of the world.
No, I like that comparison to sushi because it's true. That stigma that originally was there, I mean, it's non-existent. So you do see a future where people aren't even going to give it a second thought.
Absolutely.
Right? What kind of impact do you hope that Aspire Foods is going to have? Because this is obviously a project that started by just with this competition, but now you definitely see that there's some legs here. Well, okay, I didn't mean that. Well, okay, I said
It's okay. We're not bugged by it. It's fine.
Okay, getting back on topic. But yeah, there's a future.
Yeah, there is a future, and I think the impact we're looking at differs depending on the country that we're looking at, right?
Yeah.
So I think in Ghana, we're seeing a huge uptake in the community where people love the insects. We grow palm weevils in Ghana. People love palm weevils. They're delicious.
Tell me what those are. I was reading about that, and I was like, what are these?
Sure. Palm weevil is a beetle. It's actually a pest that causes damage in palm plantations.
Okay.
But people eat the larval stage, and they look like maggots the size of your thumb.
Yummy.
Right.
Okay,
So that's a hard ick factor to get by.
Right.
But they were one of the first insects I ever ate, and it was a struggle for me, especially having been vegetarian for so many years.
Okay.
But they're delicious.
Really?
They're like, I think they're in my top 3.
Does it taste like chicken?
Yeah. No. It's sort of got a calamari texture, but they're Swedish. They're really quite nice.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like them.
And that's a good protein source that is reliable and sustainable.
Absolutely. And I think from an impact perspective, I mean, we talk about us living in a world now where people are so informed. People are so, last year, one of the top 10 trends in food is millennials, 90% of millennials polled now read labels on the back of their product. And we live in a world where people really care about the why behind the company. And in our DNA, sort of the why behind Aspire is we refuse to live in a world where food and nutrition insecurity abound. And we have the audacity, the skills, the passion, ingenuity, rebelliousness, and commitment to excellence to do something about it. Right. In fact, those words spell out Aspire.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah, and one of the things we envision is really avoiding the charity model in the sense of we want to, produce this food and just feed people. That's great. That's a phenomenal first step. But even better than that is empowering those communities to produce their own food. So how do we take this technology? How do we simplify it and then deconstruct it and then package it and then provide it to individual farmers in rural Ghana, which we've already done, and enable them with very minimal training, even if they're completely literate, to actually start producing the source of food for their own subsistence.
Right, and be the supplier.
Absolutely, and we're finding a ripple effect that's beautiful in terms of impact we never envisioned. So another example, one of the biggest problems in slums, in parts of the world where people are earning a couple of dollars a day, is that you have this crowding. You have 7 people living in less than 100 square feet. And the worst part is, it's one thing to be retired in a developed nation or civilization where you kind of feel useless, you kind of feel that your contribution to society is limited. It's entirely a new level of devastation when you're a senior and an elder living in a home where you really are an extra mouth to feed, and you're doing very little to attach your family. So what's really cool is that in Ghana, more than 50% of our farmers are actually above the age of 65.
Wow.
And so not only is this giving them something to do in their free time, because it's very easy to do, it's not manual labor intensive whatsoever.
Okay.
Now they are actually directly feeding the family and sort of recapturing that role as the elder in the family who's really providing in a significant and direct way.
Okay, we need to try some of the stuff that you brought in.
Absolutely.
So here are the crickets, right? And I'm just going to pick one up so we can just take a look. So it's a pretty small little cricket.
Yep.
And how is this prepared?
So that cricket is just a straight roasted cricket. So
Roasted. Okay.
So if you look in Mexico, say, where grasshoppers are part of the culinary traditions, they'll roast them with lime and garlic, or they'll roast them with chilies, and they're nicely flavored. These we sell to people to add to their cooking as they wish, so these come unflavored.
These are just straight roasted cricket. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I've had cricket before. I actually really like them because they're very crunchy.
They are.
Yeah.
And it's a great garnish that you can add to a salad. You can actually, in fact, in Mexico, usually outside of soccer stadiums in the state of Oaxaca, this is a popcorn substitute.
Oh my God, yeah.
That people literally will just pop back and think about it. The protein content is excellent.
No, totally. You're getting the benefits of the protein.
Absolutely.
So it's like a bag of nuts or something.
Yeah, for
now,
sure.
the chocolate that you brought has the powder in it, right?
Right.
So, Mohammed, can you pass me that plate so I can try that?
Yes.
Chocolate, anything, I'll eat it. I mean, chocolate-covered rocks I would eat. So.
And this is actually made by one of the what is considered one of the top 10 chocolatiers in the United States, based in Austin, Delicia, and they focus on really ultra-premium gourmet chocolates that are handmade.
Delicious.
It's really quite something, and that's actually using the cricket flour. So take that and then grind it into a very fine flour that can then be used as a ingredient in any product.
So this is a really healthy chocolate bar.
That's a superfood chocolate. And
that's awesome.
and it doesn't have so now you're having chocolate without the guilt and without that chalky protein bar kind of texture that makes you very unhappy with it.
Honestly, it's delicious, and I'm not just saying that. It is like a really good quality chocolate. I mean, I don't taste the powder, but I guess that's meant to be that way, right? You don't really taste it.
Right.
So so a bar of this chocolate would be the equivalent of what in terms of protein content?
So depending on the size, it could have anywhere up to 10 to 15 grams of protein.
Wow.
So you're talking about a bar that's competitive with protein bars that are out there, but at the same time has the taste and deliciousness of being chocolate. And what's interesting is, I mean, obviously here on the table you have two products that I would say this represents the gateway product to a current consumer today. This is something you will see 5 years from now when you walk into a restaurant, as sort of an appetizer salad that is offered before people consume. So in some sense, this, we certainly don't expect, although it would be delightful to see consumers rushing to purchase, whole roasted crickets so they can consume them right away. But once you try it in flour form and once you sort of accept the ingredient, it doesn't matter in which form you consume it from that point onwards.
Slowly but surely, people will adapt to it. So cool.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. It was fascinating learning about your idea and your business, and good luck to both of you.
Thank you so much.
With Inspire Foods. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, coming up next, a look at food options beyond meat. We'll be right back. We'll see this delicious-looking beef burrito here. Well, believe it or not, it's completely meat-free. The plant-based protein in this burrito is manufactured by Beyond Meat, a business recognized by Fast Company as one of 2014's most innovative companies. Ethan Brown, Beyond Meat's founder and CEO, believes that producing protein is the most important environmental question facing our society today, and that replicating animal proteins with plants is part of the solution. A vegetarian since he was 18, Brown is the first to acknowledge that we humans are wired to crave and enjoy meat. So he set out to mimic the taste and texture of beef and chicken. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This looks great. We're actually going to try some later, right?
Yep.
But listen, you grew up on a farm, right? The backstory is very interesting with you. So you were surrounded by animals, farm animals, all that. So how did a guy who grew up on a farm, probably eating meat, all of a sudden go this way?
Right. So I had a lot of exposure to a farm growing up, but I grew up in the city, and my dad had a hobby farm.
Okay.
We would go to on the weekends and summers, and it was supposed to be a place to just go and relax and recreate, but he ended up creating a 100 Holstein cattle operation, and so we had dairy cattle. And so I was exposed very early to animal agriculture and the enormous amount of resources required to produce, in that case, milk from cows. But the principle certainly translates to meat production as well. And so seeing that firsthand, I think it made an impression on me.
Okay, but something must have happened though at some point where you thought the connection to these animals and then you eating them.
Sure. So I think
not right.
For me, the observation was I always tried to look at the animals that we kept in our home, and then the animals that were used in the broader economy for food, and I could never tell the difference between one versus the other in a way that was significant enough to pamper one and slaughter the other.
There is a cartoon that I love. It shows a dog and a cat talking to all these different cattle and cows and chickens and saying, they take care of us, we live with them, and they feed us, and they love us. And all these animals are like, wow, that's amazing. Exactly. So that was the point for you.
For sure. That was the initial thing. And then if you start to take a step back and look at the food system we have, it really became, I looked at 4 different factors, and I looked at, one being human health and heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and the relationship between those chronic diseases and disease epidemics and processed meat consumption. Then you look at resource use, and you look at for example, water here in California, the amount of water we use to create a hamburger, as an example.
And people don't realize how much water it takes. It's not just the water that is fed to the cattle and the dairy cows. It's the water that's used to grow the crops to feed. So I had
an amusing moment along those lines. I was at a restaurant recently where we live, which is in Southern California, and they were no longer serving water. They were saying you have to ask for it instead of being given to it, right? And then I opened up the menu, and it was full of hamburgers and steak. So I said, okay, people aren't focusing on the right thing.
That's right. Well, but you do admit, and this is often brought up, that our DNA is built to actually want meat, to eat meat.
Right.
So how do you go about changing someone's DNA if that's what they actually crave?
So the thing about meat is it's absolutely fascinating, our relationship to meat, right? It's the value that we ascribe to meat is far greater than its nutritional value, and it's because it's so much part of our culture, it's part of our religions, it's part of our history and evolution. And so it's important to recognize that, and it's important, I don't think you're going to build a great brand by saying, don't eat something you love. Yeah. It's much better to say, I'm going to help you eat something you love, which in this case we're saying, we're not telling you not to eat meat. We're saying we're going to create a piece of meat directly from plants. And from a science perspective, what's so fascinating about that's possible. You can actually do that. You can understand what the composition of meat is, and in our case, we look at it and we say, okay, it's a basic set of things. It's amino acids, it's lipids, it's carbohydrates, it's minerals, and it's water. And it's predominantly those amino acids and lipids and water, right? Okay. And so you can find all those in the plant kingdom, and you can understand the architecture of meat. We put a chicken breast on an MRI. You can open up a textbook and understand how the fat is distributed, how the water is distributed, how the protein is distributed. So we can do all those things, and we can create this piece of meat directly from plants. If you were to go back to business school and say, I want to take a basic operations class, the first thing they would teach you in operations class is to remove the bottleneck from the production system. Yet, if you look at our global food supply, we run an enormous amount of energy and resources through a really inefficient bottleneck, which is the animal. The animal is essentially, at this point, a bioreactor that creates meat from putting in plant matter and energy. We can do that better. And the history of technology and innovation is asking that question, how can I do this better? And we've found a way at our company to do that.
So let's talk about how you went about creating your Beyond Meat products. You said you actually looked at a chicken breast under an MRI to see the composition of it.
Sure.
So pretty much your product is composed in exactly the same way that meat is. It's just using the plant proteins rather than the meat.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that that what we're trying to. So humans have been consuming meat for almost 2 million years, right? And even longer, certain species. And so it's this is a long process. We're not going to get there overnight. Right. The products we have in the market today are very good, and they've fooled a number of people. Mark Bittman, Alton Brown, et cetera, have all said these are great products.
Yeah. And these are well-known culinary experts.
Yeah, exactly.
You've fooled, yeah.
And so Whole Foods for 3 days in Northeast United States mixed up our products in their prepared food section and served chicken, actual animal chicken as our product, and our product is animal chicken in a chicken salad.
Did they do that on purpose, or was it accidental? Oh, no!
Yeah, so it was covered in the paper at the time. But I think the important thing is those were in dishes. And what we need to get to is the point where this product on a standalone basis, it's indistinguishable from its animal protein equivalent.
Right.
And that takes a lot of investment. We spent millions of dollars to create new versions of each of our products. And those will be released year after year, to the point where we get it to where the consumer can say, okay, this is completely indistinguishable. I can use this in any dish that I would use animal protein in.
Because, the bad reputation that fake meat has had in the past is that it tastes like fake meat.
Correct.
Right? It's rubbery, or the texture is weird, right? So people were very turned off by it. So clearly you've tapped into what it takes to make it seem very, very authentic.
I think what you have to recognize about meat is meat tastes great. It's satiating.
Full disclosure, everyone. I don't eat meat. Right. So this is actually a great segment for me because I don't actually like meat, but it's interesting to hear from you that people who love meat are being convinced of this as well.
Well, I think there's something, and we talked about what are the factors that are driving it, and if you look at almost every day now, there's some new study that comes out that says that there's an association between meat consumption and a disease. Right. Or you look at the resource issues we talked about. Climate change is one that's really fascinating to me. So I worked for a long time on fuel cells for a fuel cell company. I did business development for them. And we spent $1 billion developing fuel cells, right? Wow. If you put that amount of money into creating a piece of meat from plants, you'd have it almost tomorrow, right? Wow. And so I think you have to think about what's the total impact of your actions. And so there was a study done in 2009 by 2 scientists. They looked at all of the emissions associated with raising livestock for protein and for food. And they found that 51% of greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed to livestock. So that's
51%.
Right, more than automotive, right? More than stationary power plants. So I said, well, what am I focusing on? Let me go focus on the right thing, right? And so, what's really cool about this is that it's not. If you actually look at how those numbers put together, one major contributor is the fact that all animals are breathing, and when they breathe, they're emitting carbon.
Right. Yep.
There used to be a huge carbon sink to absorb that in terms of forests. Those forests are being diminished, so you have this kind of disequilibrium that's occurring.
Yes, yeah. So we're in the negative when it comes to that. Yep. I know that you've had some interest from some pretty high-profile people. Yeah. One of them being Bill Gates. Yeah. But there's a funny story about the fact that he was a little bit hesitant in terms of the concept. He loved the concept of it. He didn't like the actual execution for himself. Right.
So he, first, it's a blessing to have him involved.
Yeah.
And I think, what he was drawn to is he was obviously someone who's disrupted a major industry and changed the way people communicate. And he was very interested in disrupting the protein space and providing particularly a low-cost protein solution for global hunger.
Yeah.
Right? And so, as we grow, we are very much looking at the Chinese market, at the Indian market, Africa, et cetera. Today, we focus on the U.S. We have more demand here in the U.S. than we can actually supply, which is a great problem to have as a business. We just need to continue to invest in our facilities to do that. But Bill Gates has been a tremendous supporter, as have many of our investors.
Well, you mentioned the idea of helping in the global hunger issue,
Right.
and Bill Gates is a big proponent of that. So with plant-based proteins, that's got to be a potential problem solver when it comes to that issue, right?
Yeah. So if you think about, if just taking the U.S. as an example, if you look at the percentage of agricultural land that's dedicated to providing crops for animal feed, for example, or direct grazing, it's 80% of our total agricultural land.
Man.
Imagine if you didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
So it all gets back again to this central observation that's an inefficient system we've set up, and isn't it time to disrupt that and create one that's more efficient?
Yeah. So you also talked about the lower cost of
Right.
plant-based proteins. So that's got to help, again, in solving global hunger because low cost and the nutrition value is equal, isn't it?
Yeah, and so it's also a bit of a marathon. I mean, it's so today, because of our scale, we can't offer things that are lower cost than meat. But there's no material obstacle to dramatically underpricing meat over time as we scale. Like if you were to look at Tyson or Purdue and their facilities, we'd be a very, very small percentage of their total square footage, right? And we just don't have the scale. But as we grow and as more and more consumers say, you know what, tonight I'm going to have a plant-based version of meat versus an animal version of meat, you'll start to see us just be able to have more aggressive pricing.
What are the hurdles, though? I mean, is it still the perception? Is it still people wanting that big, fat, juicy steak? And if it's not real, then forget about it.
So that is, there are cultural issues for sure, and those are the ones that really fascinate me. Is how do we get people to think about meat? You know, there's these two ways to think about it. You can get hung up on meat has to come from a chicken, cow, or pig, and if you do, then you have this ever worsening set of problems. You have the climate, all these other things, right? But if you can think about meat in terms of meat, what's the composition of meat? Then you're freed up to create that composition from many different sources, right? And so that's what we're doing. We have to get the consumer to understand that it's just as satiating. It's better for them, right? It's a cleaner source of protein. We couldn't create cholesterol if we wanted to, and we wouldn't put it in there anyway, right? So if you're going to redesign meat, why not take some of the things that are maybe bad for people out of it, right, and offer something that's better?
Well, listen, we have some of the products here, so we got to taste it. I mentioned the beef burrito here, and then this is a chicken salad sandwich, right?
And this is much like the one where there was that confusion over animal protein versus plant.
Because here's the thing, it actually even looks like chicken, right?
Yeah, and what we've done, so much work on there is creating that texture that is much like a muscle texture.
Right.
And so what you're doing, you're taking a set of protein from plants and you're just reorganizing them so they bind together, they stitch together, a lot like protein would in muscle. And that's what gives that impact on your teeth.
Right. Well, I've got to say, this tastes totally like chicken.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm not going to eat the beef burrito, but I believe, I'm sure it's... Take it with you. We'll give you a doggy bag.
Thank you.
But it's delicious. Well, Ethan, I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. And it really will make a global difference. And people need to catch on to this concept.
That's what we're hoping
brilliant.
for. And every year we're going to be producing products that are better and better. I mean, that's the thing about our company. We have a firm belief that over time we will get it exactly right. And each year, I think the consumer has enough trust in what we're doing. Each year we release new products that get closer and closer.
Right. Well, judging from this, you're pretty dang close already.
Thank you very much.
Ethan, thank you so much.
No, it's a great pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Coming up next, could you survive solely on food that was either discarded or given to you by others? We meet one woman who did just that. We'll be right back. According to a 2013 report issued by the United Nations Environmental Program, roughly 1/3 or more than 1 billion tons of all food produced in the world for human consumption gets wasted. Filmmaker Jen Rustemeyer and partner Grant Baldwin were equally disturbed by the negative impact of food waste and decided to do something about it. The pair devised a plan whereby they'd live solely on food that was discarded or given to them by others for 6 months, and they captured the entire journey on camera. What transpired is seen in their award-winning film, Just Eat It.
Mandarin orange. I've been trying to track how much food we find, And in the first month alone, we brought home $1,127 of food. And even though we were trying to pay for it, we only ended up spending $33. And then after that, it just kind of got out of control, and I couldn't even monitor it anymore.
I'm starting to lose the excitement of finding tons of food like this. But ultimately, it's the fact that what we're doing, it's not reducing the amount of waste. Somebody's losing money on this when it gets thrown out.
I mean, on the one hand, I'm happy because we found food and it's really exciting. And then on the other hand, I feel so guilty for even feeling excited because it's such a shame that so much food is going to waste. And it's really depressing, actually.
That really is amazing. Well, here to tell us more about their unique experiment and why we should all just eat it is filmmaker Jen Rustemeyer, who joins us via satellite from Vancouver, British Columbia. Jen, welcome to Full Frame.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jen, that clip, I mean, it's really staggering and shocking how much food is discarded everywhere. Were you even prepared to see what you did on a day in and day out basis?
I don't think I was. I mean, you hear these statistics like 40% of food is being wasted, but you don't really understand what that means until you see it with your own eyes. I mean, that's why we made the movie in the first place, to expose the issue.
I gotta ask, did your friends and family think you were crazy to do this?
Yeah, definitely. Our families are supportive. They thought it was a little strange, and I was embarrassed to tell my colleagues for sure. I was working in an office at the time, and I was petrified that my boss was going to see me, you know, hanging out near the dumpster after work.
Right.
But when they saw the quality of food, they actually really shifted their mindset.
That's amazing, and I bet this film is definitely going to shift the mindset of a lot of people. But I know that when you set out with your partner, you had some rules that you had to follow on this 6-month journey. What were those rules?
Well, we basically had to eat only rescued food, so food that was destined to be thrown out or had already been thrown in the dumpster. Of course, we used our common sense. We weren't eating spoiled or rancid food. And then we also were allowed to take food from other people. So if they came to our house, we'd serve them rescued food, but if we went to their house, we would eat what they had.
We have another clip from the documentary, so why don't we take a look at that and talk about it afterwards?
I went to a banana plantation, and after one day of harvest on a single plantation, there was a truckload of bananas being wasted. And those were being wasted solely on the basis of cosmetic standards. The banana plantation was growing bananas for European supermarkets. Supermarkets tell you what diameter, length, curvature, all of those parameters have to be exactly right for that supermarket, so the bananas basically look the same. It is deeply shocking when you see mountains, concentrated mountains of food being wasted. It's something that every time I see, I still get shocked by it.
Jen, that is so extraordinary that there are such specific standards that are required for a piece of fruit to be brought into a grocery store. I mean, that must have been shocking to you as well when you started discovering all of these standards.
It was absolutely shocking. And I mean, when you hear things like, or when you see things like apples that are all the same size at the grocery store, you think, oh, they must all grow that way. But actually, all the apples that are too big or too small have been wasted along the way.
All right, we have another clip from the documentary. We'll take a look at that and talk about that as well.
We said that if we go over to someone's house and we can eat their food so that we can alleviate that kind of stress of making everybody feel uncomfortable. But we didn't take into account, like, when we go away for an entire weekend, we can't just, like, go to someone's house and then just eat everything they have. We can't drive around a strange city and try to find some food. I mean, we're trying to do it now, and it's not working out very well. No way there's even anything in there.
Did you ever get sick and tired of doing this, though? I mean, were you just like, wow, I'm not sure if I can do this and constantly think about food every minute of every day?
I was done with the project after about the first month, and then Grant decided that we needed to go for 6 months to really prove the point. It's not glamorous. I mean, we were basically grocery shopping at about 10 o'clock at night, driving around in the dark. We weren't hopping fences or breaking locks or anything, but there was definitely an element of sneaking around.
Right, right, okay. Let me just go back to one issue that I find fascinating. We were talking about the food that's always discarded if it's not perfect. There's also an issue about expiration dates, and those are really rigid standards as well, right? I mean, even if something is not that close to being expired, a lot of places will still throw it out, won't they?
Yeah, this is a good point. So food is really being thrown out for the two major reasons: aesthetic standards and the best before dates. And I don't use the word expiry date because if you look at those products, it says best before date. And what that is an indicator of peak freshness. So when are those chips the crispiest? When is the pastry the flakiest? It has nothing to do with safety, and it's actually safe and legal to eat that food after that date.
So why do you think companies do this then, if it's not actually accurate? And they, again, we're all programmed to think expiration, expiration.
Exactly. I mean, I think the dates were invented for stock rotation. It is important to know when the food is made so that you can make sure that you're, selling it in the correct order. I think that consumers have become confused by the dates and they rely on them too much. So many people throw food out before the best before date because they're scared of it. And we really need to get back to using our senses. Milk is a good example. You can tell when milk is off, and even when it is starting to go sour, you can make pancakes with it.
That's true. That's true. Good point. Jen, I know there's environmental concerns, too, when it comes to food waste on both ends of food production and then throwing it out, right? Food production, because why are we producing so much food if so much is being thrown out? But then on the back end as well, there's a lot of repercussions to food waste.
Yeah, it's not just the food itself, it's all the energy and the water, the transportation, the refrigeration that goes into the food. I mean, that's wrapped up in the cost of food. When people complain that food's getting more expensive, if we stopped wasting 40% of it, food would probably be a lot cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. And what interesting statistic that I didn't realize is that actually 50% of the food wasted is done by consumers. We're the ones who are actually throwing out a lot of this stuff on our own, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Out of all the environmental issues, this is one that we as individuals can actually impact. We are wasting 50% of the food, and that's in our own homes, leaving food on our plate, buying too much, and leaving it in the back of the fridge.
And that's interesting, Jen, because this is an issue that we can actually control, because there's so many, environmental issues, social issues in the world where the individual thinks, well, I'm not the decision maker, it's policy, and I can't change that. But in this case, we actually can.
Yeah, not only can you control the amount of food that you're wasting, you're actually potentially going to save a lot of money. I'm talking, $700 a year you could save by not wasting so much food.
Speaking of money, were you able to track how much food you rescued and the dollar amount, the value of that food?
Right, so we couldn't measure the amount that we found because there was so much, but we counted what we brought into the house and we assigned what we thought was this fair market value, and we found about $20,000 worth of food.
All right, that's a substantial amount of money for folks. I know that sometimes you would find some really crazy stuff or just enormous amounts of the same stuff. Can you tell me a little bit, give me some examples of that?
Well, something that would happen frequently is that you'd have an entire case of something and maybe the corner would get damaged, so they would throw the whole case out.
Wow.
An example would be eggs, right? So some of the eggs are broken, they throw the whole case out, and we had literally, 20 dozen eggs at one time just lined up in our fridge.
That's incredible, just because of a little dent. That's, wow. I'm getting angry just listening to you right now. Well, I think a lot of people who don't know how the system works, including myself, we would say, well, why doesn't this food get donated to food banks and other charities? I mean, why throw it out? Why is that not happening?
I think it happens to some extent. I mean, there are organizations that donate. A lot of it comes down to logistics. So who's going to pay to drive that food to the places that need it? Who's going to pick it up as soon as it is available? So I've seen some apps coming out that are starting to bridge that gap.
Right, right. From a personal level, Jen, I have to imagine that this really changed you in so many ways by doing this experiment. Long term, I mean, how do you feel now, and how do you look at this issue differently?
Personally, I really value food more. I mean, I realize that it's a luxury to go into the grocery store and buy whatever we want, whenever we want. We have an amazing food system. I'm much more careful in my own house, so we actually have this bin that says "Eat Me First" on it, and we put our leftovers in there or our half onions, and we make sure that we are prioritizing eating that food, so we're better at managing food in our own house.
Jen, I'm wondering how this experiment for you created more empathy in terms of a better understanding of how actually people live who don't have their next meal. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. How did your perspective change that way?
I got a sense of what it's like to not know where your next meal is coming from, but really I think nothing can compare to the real thing because, you know, we lived in a house that was very comfortable and we had the benefit of a car where we could drive around looking for food. I mean, the lifestyle we were living is not practical for people to live. We're not advocating that anybody should have to go dumpster diving. It's really about breeding awareness of the issue and making sure that that food gets to the people who need it before it hits the garbage.
Right. Well, Jen, really remarkable effort on your part and your partner. It's you know, shocking stuff that everyone needs to know about and see for themselves. So thank you so much for doing the film, and good luck to you.
Thanks very much.
Well, stay right there. We'll be right back with this week's Full Frame Close-Up. From harvesting to feeding, Food Forward, a volunteer-structured organization, reinvigorates surplus produce that would normally go to waste. It does this through various community-based programs, including backyard harvesting, farmers markets, and wholesale recovery. Now, all of the fruits and vegetables collected by Food Forward are then donated to hunger relief agencies across Southern California. This is around 270,000 kilograms of produce a month. That's enough to feed 100,000 people every month. Full Frame met with the volunteers of Food Forward to witness how food that might otherwise go to waste is feeding the hungry.
There's a lens, I think, at the very top of the Food Forward philosophy that tries to show people and encourage people that whatever they have, if they look close at it, they have excess of it, and they can share it, and they can get much greater gifts by giving it away and gifting it to people instead of holding on to it tightly and saying, I need these extra oranges. Well, you really don't. Why? Because next year you're going to have another 3,000 of them on your tree, and if you share them, there's plenty of people that will benefit even more from it. Live in an area of Los Angeles that was predominantly citrus orchards a few decades before I lived there, and many of those trees remain. I began to see these trees that were hanging with fruit 3, 4, 5 months a year, and no one was eating it. And at the same time, I was hearing stories and seeing people in lines at food pantries as the economy tanked. And I thought, what if I could connect this fruit with people in need? We used a friend's backyard as an experiment. About 3 weeks later, we had harvested 800 pounds from this backyard with 2 trees, a tangerine tree and an orange tree. And that fruit, within 10 minutes of being harvested, was driven over to a food pantry just a mile away. It was handed out within 2 hours. Fresher produce than you or I could go and buy anywhere. I found a bunch of people who kind of drank the Kool-Aid with me, and we powered through about 100,000 pounds of hand-picked, mostly citrus in the first year, from backyards across LA. And we're at a point now where we have 3 programs. We do harvesting in backyards and public spaces. We do close to 20 farmers markets across LA and Ventura County on a weekly basis. And the big one that we added just over 2 years ago is the wholesale program. Millions of pounds a week are discarded unnecessarily. Either it doesn't look right, it's the wrong size, it's been double ordered, there's a bumper crop, and we take those pallets and we collect them, verify that they are indeed like 80 to 90% quality produce, and then we disperse them to top feeding food banks and food pantries that then distribute it on our behalf. And that food reaches over an estimated 1 million people in the last year. Food Forward directly feeds about 100 agencies and about indirectly another 200 agencies. The range of clients is one of my greatest sources of pride in this organization. One of the groups we've been working with for a few years now through the Hollywood Farmers Market is Project Angel Food. They are a cornerstone agency in Los Angeles with an amazing reputation that's well earned for feeding thousands of people every year who are terminally ill. They started with HIV patients but have since added other illnesses, people with cancer and so forth, and they make sure that these people are eating nutritious hot meals every single day.
Food Forward actually approached us and said, we're going to the farmers markets getting produce, would you like to be a recipient? And we're like, yes, that's exactly what we want. So it's been a great partnership, delivering about 10,000 meals a week. We prepare them here in our kitchen and then deliver them to our clients' homes. We're going to actually deliver a meal to one of our clients. Edmundo, he's been with us for since 2007. He is a person who has AIDS, and we help make the ends meet, help him with his nutritional support, and help him fight this disease. People who are struggling with critical illness especially, they're weakened by this disease, they're not feeling like cooking or shopping, and food sometimes goes by the wayside and it decreases their health. And so that having the food helps them stay in home, be fed, and make their ends meet financially, and they fight the disease.
Our volunteers meet here every day at 11:30, and they have our Food Forward boxes and a couple of carts, and we go through the market with those carts and the boxes and ask the vendors if they want to make a donation. Hi. You guys want boxes for Food Forward today? They will usually give us stuff that they have extra of, so it's stuff that it's still good, it's still fresh, it's healthy produce. If they have extra lettuce or extra oranges, they'll give us those boxes of produce, and then we just record it all.
There is a magical moment in taking a piece of fruit off a tree that we couldn't have created if we wanted to. Right? This is a natural phenomenon that this tree does, but we in a sense become change makers by taking that piece of fruit that was given to us and passing it along to someone.
I really love the idea, the way that everyone can get behind the idea of preventing food waste and also feeding the hungry. I think it's a really easy way to kind of take care of one problem while solving another. It helps pretty much everyone involved in the system, and I like that we fit in to like a little niche.
Two years old, we were invited to be part of a fast pitch, which is a growing movement of, you have like 3 minutes to kind of give an elevator speech in front of 500 investors to earn some money, and, we did really well. But the kicker was that my coach at the time came with her family, and the family had a nanny. She was well dressed, She came from looked like a very nice middle-class background, and she pulled me aside at the reception after the event. And she said, I just have to thank you because I think it was like 3 weeks earlier, I didn't have a job, and I was eating the fruit you guys gave at the food pantry that you spoke of in the presentation. But the immediate understanding that hunger knows no boundaries, and that everybody has moments, and sometimes more moments than others, where they need assistance. This wasn't a woman sitting with a sign at the end of a freeway off-ramp saying food needed. This was a woman that somehow was able to pull herself together and dress well and get this job, and was now kind of in a nice middle-class family watching the kids. But just a few weeks earlier, she was on a much different place. And the food that we provided was a lifeline for her. And that felt really powerful. I don't want us to become just another anti-hunger nonprofit. I think we come at it with a slightly different view of the value of the food, of the people, and of the human capital that it takes to make it all happen. I don't think it has to be like nobility to go and help other people, but there is an amazing call to us when you look across Los Angeles and you see the number of homeless encampments and the people that are clearly living outside because they have to. No one lives under an underpass because they want to. It's because they have to. And what can we do? What can each individual do to soften that, to make it just a little bit better? What I love about Food Forward is that it could be as simple as an hour and a half or 2 hours of your life picking oranges. But hopefully that becomes a gateway to bigger action or more regular activism or service. I just think we all need to just do a little bit more and think a little bit more compassionately.
Looks like a great program. Well, that's it for this week. Join the conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now you can watch Full Frame on our new mobile app, available worldwide on any smartphone for free. Get the latest news headlines and connect to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Weibo. Search CCTV America on your app store to download today. And all of our interviews can still also be found online at cctv-america.com. And of course, let us know what you'd like us to take Full Frame next. Simply email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm May Lee in Los Angeles. We'll see you next time.